Welcome to another webinar of our educational sessions project. Today is a quite special session, and that is because we're going to be talking about one of the most popular apps available in the Atlassian marketplace. I'm talking about Structure. Structure is a portfolio management app, and it has been on the market for more than 10 years. But before we dive into it, just let me say a few things here. If you are new to the sessions and new to ServiceRocket, welcome. We are a Platinum Atlassian partner. And if you'd like to find out more information about us, you can just visit this website right here. What you see here is a comment from one of our customers, Qantas. I truly believe that this comment really gives an idea about our position in the market. And here I have a short statement that defines who we are and what we do. And now back to ALM Works and Structure. Here we have a picture of Phil. Phil is a dear friend as well as a former co-worker. We used to drink a lot of Red Bull together and have a lot of fun when we worked for ALM Works, or when I was part of ALM Works. If you don't know Phil, he's the head of solutions at ALM, and he has a lot of experience when it comes to portfolio management. And that's why we have Phil here. So with that said, Phil, please take it away. It's all yours.
Thank you, Mario. For the record, my Red Bull consumption has dropped significantly since Mario has left, but I miss him for a lot of other reasons. So today we'll talk a little bit about project management, also portfolio management, program management. A lot of the concepts and techniques apply to almost anything that has the PM abbreviation, it seems. And we'll talk about how Structure augments and extends Jira. So we'll talk a little bit about what does that mean? What does project management look like in Jira when we talk about just purely Jira core, Jira software? What is the reason you would consider adding an add-on? Why Structure may be one to consider? I'll talk also a little bit about the differences between managing waterfall and agile teams. That's kind of where a lot of the portfolio management concepts ends up living. And then for the advanced use cases, I'll briefly kind of touch on how we could mix the two, because in a lot of organizations, you'll have agile teams and a slightly more traditional waterfall approach to your portfolio management. And those two don't need to be at odds or in conflict with each other. So as long as there's clear communication and some guidelines, then you can all be kind of successful with that. So let's dive right in. So project management in Jira itself, for those of you who've got experience with it, is actually quite interesting, because as you work with teams, which is Jira's kind of core mandate and focus, it's actually quite useful. It's a really designed tool towards managing either a Scrum team or a Kanban team. And they have these beautiful boards that you can use to see what the team is up to. So you can use, for example, a board to track backlogs, to make plans for sprints, which are akin to roadmaps. Nowadays, it'll come with roadmaps as well if you're on cloud. And you can kind of plan out relatively easily what's going on at this particular scale. If you use a Kanban board, you can work this way, and you're a little less interested in the exact timeline of things, but you're working on limiting your work in progress. The problem is, as soon as you start to care about more than a team, this becomes a little bit of a challenge with the user interface. In particular, we're talking about the fact that you can see these cards, and if I start to look at 10 in flight, it works. But if I need to start looking at 20, 50, 100, 150, even the Scrum boards, which has slightly less real estate per individual card, I'm starting to lose the overview a little bit. And the other thing that structure really excels at, which is where a lot of this stuff kind of falls apart if you're just using Jira, is that when you look at the portfolio level or even the program level, you can't see the relationship between a lot of the work, right? I can't track dependencies between teams. I can't see how certain epics are going to complete around the same time, and I'm tracking multiple epics of work. And so that's where structure comes in. It allows you to bring structure to your data and create a work breakdown structure or various other hierarchies that you can then use to ask questions of your data. Very kind of poignantly is the fact that we don't add any extra fields, none of that stuff. Everything is based on the Jira data that you have already. So adding structure to your tool belt or to your portfolio won't impact anyone else, whether they're the development team or other project managers who are trying to do the work. But if you start looking at things like, let's say business level Kanban, I'm trying to track portfolio or program levels of work. I'll have multiple epics. I'm tracking them. And what I really care about is some of the details in the execution of these. Another example we'll talk about is how these things kind of fit together. I mean, I can track these epics on the Scrum board, but I don't see, how the relationship is between epic 1 and epic 10 and epic 11. And so I'm losing certain bits of information. And while I can query things and I can get some stuff going with, for example, some filters, what I really need is I want to see how these things relate to each other so that I can ask the follow-up questions, because that's not the only thing I care about. I don't care about the stories in Sprint, but I care about when they're finished. I care about what is blocking what. And so that's where structure will come in. And the way structure works under the hood, and we're not going to dive too much into the mechanics of it, is you set up rules very akin to the filters on a Jira board, and it will use these rules to build up the visual of the structure board. So in this case, we just got some epics in here and we're bringing in the stories below it. And you can see with the indentation already, the stories belong to those epics. And I can start to bring in information like the progress for each epic, but also the roll up of things like story points. And this is already pretty key because I can start to see how, maybe the prioritization of different epics based on weight and assignee might need to change. What gets interesting is when we start adding more information to this particular view. So we can start bringing in questions like, hey, let's pull in the sprints and do some backlog grooming while we're also looking at the weighting, whether it's by rank or by any other metric, like weighted shortest job first. And we can roll up various other things. We can roll up risks, for example. We can mitigate or accept different risks. We can see how different elements, whether it's progress or work or anything else that's numerical, rolls up all the way to the top of this work breakdown structure. And we can build out partial or full hierarchies of these work breakdown structures because they tell us a little bit about how this information kind of relates to each other. And so whatever element of this particular work segment, business unit, whatever we end up calling it, lines of business, all those things, how they relate to each other, I can pull in and customize how much data I want to see, what columns do I want to add. So you get kind of the benefit of the tree structure and Excel all in one place. And so how does this relate to things like Agile and Waterfall? Well, one of the things we can do is we can add the time dimension to this. So using the fairly familiar Gantt chart, we can take whatever structure we have and build out estimations or use estimations that exist already in these particular tickets and build out a rough roadmap. And where things get interesting is we can do these based on different elements of data that Jira has for us. For example, we can be date driven and we can just say, hey, I want you to grab the start date field and place every item on its start date. Or you can say, hey, I want to use the dependencies and I want to make a plan based on what is blocking what bit of work. So if I leave my teams alone, when are they going to get to this epic? When are they going to have all the work done to enable this other thing? And so those kinds of questions are actually quite crucial because the earlier you can ask them and the earlier you can surface any of these kind of either dependencies that haven't been addressed or issues that are otherwise kind of blocking, like maybe you have resources that are over allocated. The sooner these things show up, the more options you generally have to mitigate them and to sidestep them and to kind of avoid any of the problems. Because oftentimes, at least I remember when I was a developer, you wouldn't notice these problems until they were really right in front of you. And then you have to pivot relatively quickly. You don't have the instructions and the guidance that you need otherwise. And there's a lot of inefficiency with that way of working. And so being able to plan properly, to be able to track dependencies and to be able to look at it from multiple angles, because that's the other key thing here, is that I may be able to schedule this once with dependencies, and I can optionally say, hey, once we commit to a specific date, I want to use that date. Now, do I have any conflicting information? So all those types of questions end up being answered in one quick visual. And one of the great things I think about it is that the time axis is usually where a lot of people have disagreements between agile teams and anyone that's trying to do things in a more structured, traditional waterfall fashion. And it comes down to estimates. It comes down to, is this something we can commit to? And so this allows us to have that conversation around the same data, right? We're talking about the Jira data and everything else. So you can go to a team and say, hey, this is what it looks like. This is what you've committed to. What's wrong with this particular picture so that I can fix it, right? And the team can say, well, that epic over there, Gantt 3, we estimated that originally at 20 story points or 11 weeks of work. When we looked at it, it turned out to be much bigger. So we have to adjust the estimate. And you get conversations that are much more about the work, much more about what can we do to work together to achieve the business goal, and a lot less about, well, you said it was going to be done in 3 weeks, and it's 3 weeks, that was 3 weeks ago. So is it done yet? And generally speaking, this kind of more proactive approach allows for you to see problems earlier, deal with them in a less stressful environment, and therefore obviously get to more value. The last thing actually already ties into our advanced use cases, and that's about tracking some of this information together. So like I said, we can do things like, hey, let's add a time dimension to this, and we can translate different things. Like some people will estimate in story points, other people will estimate in hours of work. And if we have some sort of translation table, we can start making all these things visible together. I'll leave out my personal feelings about using story points as a measure of time estimation, but a lot of people use it, especially if they're doing, say, scaled agile. And so you can also address certain things. Like, for example, you can assume things are going to be done at the end of the sprint, and teams are responsible for the independent or the initial kind of organization inside the sprint itself. So what you can then plan is around those 2 weeks or however many weeks you end up having a sprint, those increments. And you can proactively communicate these things. For example, hey, this is what the sprint looks like, but here's a milestone that's a hard deadline we need to hit. And we can track those things and see where things are falling through the cracks, because those are important. Those are the things you're really trying to get to. And then the last thing, as I mentioned before, this is just an example of how we can translate those things. We have a formula column that allows us to do a lot of really interesting calculations. We can do a lot of Excel-like stuff, which I'll actually sidestep that rabbit hole for now. What I really want to talk about is how some of these calculations are really relevant. So progress is obviously something that you always want to see at a glance. Another one is mixing and matching. So like I said, some teams work one way and some teams work other ways. So you can use time tracking for some teams, and then you can add what's called a slice to allow multiple different teams to end up on the same Gantt chart because they calculate differently. And so you can say, hey, for this subsection of work, this JQL query, I want you guys to use the story points and 8 hours per story point calculation. And then they both all end up on the Gantt chart together. And it'll allow you to have a slightly more apples to apples comparison when you have, team A and team B, and they're all working on the same thing, or they're all part of the same portfolio of work. And so those are the elements of what structure will do. It allows you to visualize your own data, bring it together in a way that makes sense to you, It's very based on how you have the information. So it's a way to manipulate and visualize Jira as it currently stands. And so that actually already brings us to the Q&A session. So I'm going to hand it over back to Mario. I'll see if we have any questions that have come in yet.
Yeah, alrighty. No questions for now, but we still have some time. If anyone has any questions, please don't be shy.
Well, while they're coming up with that, I'd like to add two more things. So everything I've mentioned so far, obviously, is available both on cloud and on-prem. So whether you're on data center server, on cloud, if you're thinking about moving from one to the other, all the capabilities I've shown you so far are available. We're going to early access the formulas on cloud soon. So if you want to try that out, you could send us a quick email and we can add you to the list of people that have access to that functionality. And like I said, it's very flexible. It's a flexible tool that allows you to manipulate your data. There's a little bit of a learning curve in terms of you have to know a little bit about your data and know what you're asking. But it allows you to go quite far once you have that ability and once you know the questions you want to ask. And as Mario can attest, we have an excellent support system, an excellent team of solutions engineers and support technicians that are helpful, that can help out with simple questions in terms of like, hey, can it do this? How would I do this? How do I formulate this? To more complicated things, like I've got a team doing this particular type of work. Here's a priority that's in conflict, and we can address some of the more process-related questions too.
Yeah, absolutely. The support team of ALM Works already has an incredible reputation at the marketplace. So I'm sure that as soon as you submit a ticket, they'll get back to you right away. But for now, let's see if we have any questions here. Okay. Can you give us an example of a formula? That would be the first question that we got here.
Absolutely. So like I already kind of hinted, formulas allow you to manipulate data that exists into kind of new bits of information. So a really common one we see used a lot is signaling certain conditionals. So you can use very simple things like if the due date was in the past, I want to see how many overdue items I have. And it's a great way, especially when you're looking across the hierarchy, you can roll up questions like that. So you can roll up the number of overdue items. You can roll up information like how many tickets do I have that are at risk? And then you can define that risk in a variety of different ways. Like, for example, is the estimate field empty? Is it not assigned, but it's already supposedly in progress? So a lot of little conditional questions like that usually kind of end up being manually checked by someone, whether it's the project manager or someone else, to see if data has been filled in, what's missing, what's kind of sidestepped through the normal workflow process. We see people use formulas for that.
Yep. Okay. I hope that answers. We got another question here, Phil. Can you show us an example of a hierarchy by giving us a quick demo?
Sure. Let me seamlessly transition over to our little demo instance. And so what you'll see here is I built out a hierarchy based on the initiative. I'll rebuild this very quickly because I think it's very instructive to see how, just like the filter on a normal Jira board, we can build out using these rules. So the automation, you add that, and I could, again, knowing what the data looks like, I have a hierarchy inside Jira. I've got initiatives. The children under that are called epics, and then under that I have stories. So I can just say a simple issue type equals initiative. And you can see it auto completes. Obviously, I can add that rule. And then as the rule gets added, you can see it'll bring everything in dynamically. So in this case, I didn't specify a project, so it just gives me everything. And so I can use other rules to manipulate those particular hierarchies. So again, these are existing bits of data. These are existing issue links inside Jira. I know that I've connected my initiatives to my epics using the implements link. And this is the direction I'm using. I'll allow and apply those changes. And you can see here, I've started to create multiple hierarchies. And you can see, for example, it'll highlight when you have potential loops. So you might have some conflicting information or you have multiple links. And what's really interesting is that you can also use this to manipulate the data. So while I built this hierarchy here, I can also drag and drop items and it will relink them. So it will change the linkages so that the current representation of the hierarchy is active. And then finally, I can bring in more information this way. I can bring in stories under the epics, subtask under stories. And you'll notice how the progress here updates each time. So the progress and other calculations that are being done inside the structure, they update based on the context of the structure that you have right now. If you add more issues, if you bring in items that are blocking, for example, everything else will update. So all your aggregation, all your roll-ups, all your individual formulas and things like that will give you new information. So it's a great and very powerful way to look at information dynamically.
That's awesome, Phil. Thanks. Another question that we have here, can you inline edit fields through the columns?
That's an excellent question. So the simple answer is yes. You can go in on any of the fields and double click and update them accordingly. What you'll notice, however, is that, for example, here I only have open and in progress. And if I double click this one again, once it updates, now I have, for example, but essentially what I can do is I can only update fields and information that I have access to. So all the Jira permissions that your project currently has and that are in place, so workflow transitions, do you have edit permissions on these fields? Can I even see them? So for example, if I don't have access to certain projects, they won't show up in the structure that I'm looking at. All those things are respected. So you can edit things in line. Things like aggregation, however, you can't edit in line because they are results of the calculation. So you'd have to either edit the primitive, which would be the lowest element. For example, if we aggregated story points, or you would have to change the calculation directly. So for example, I could change how progress is calculated instead of being by time tracking by custom percent fields such as story points or just by status. And you can see how you can define and customize pretty much everything. So it's all at your fingertips within your control, and you can kind of manipulate as needed.
All right. And a follow-up question that still relates to this, Phil. By updating the fields in structure, we are also updating them in Jira. Is that right?
Correct. In fact, you are not just doing that. You're using Jira actions every time you update anything in line. So all your tracking, your governance, and your logging of information of who did what action is all the same as if you were to update on the issue details page or anywhere else inside Jira. So everything else maintains. There's no sidestepping of permissions. There's no sidestepping of any governance rules you have already set up. All of it kind of follows from that particular setup.
Awesome. Yeah. Let's see if we have any other questions here. Okay, I see one more. Can you add custom fields as columns?
Yes. So anything that is tied to the issue itself, so custom fields. Let me just pull up an example of whatever custom field exists here. This one doesn't seem to have any, but what's interesting is you can add any of the custom fields, and if it doesn't have an entry, it won't show you that. So for example, V&V ready is a custom field I set up, and only for those issues that have an entry will I be able to see that particular field. So in this case, it won't show up. But the interesting thing is because the structures aren't tied to a project, you have access to every field that already exists here. So you'll be able to search for, things like I have a custom field for Scrum teams and I've allocated them that way. And that information will show up. So you can see here, that particular one has been very creatively filled in by me during some earlier demo. And what's interesting is that certain fields, if there is no screen attached to that issue, like for example, for here, it will tell me there's no editor there, right? So just like I couldn't do this through other screens, I can't do it here, or I'm either not allowed to, or it's read only. All those limitations that are already kind of set up in Jira exist here as well. But for example, this one I can set to, I don't know, about team. So any custom fields that I do want to add, I can add that way, and you'll see them update accordingly.
Gotcha. Let's see what else we have here. Can you give us an example of how permissions work in structure?
Sure, that's actually kind of a complicated question to go into too deeply, but basically you have structure the app level permissions where you can set access to, certain people only have access to certain functionality like the automation, other people can only view the structure. And then you have the ability to set certain permissions like that per individual structure. So a capital S for the app and small s for individual structures. And you can go and under manage structure, you can set things like who has access to it. So I can say everybody has view access, but if I want people to have edit access, they need to be part of a certain group or certain project role. So I've got that kind of control as well here. And we'll find a group, for example, Jira admins or devs. And you can add that rule and, then it takes place.
Nice. Great. I guess we have one last question here, Phil.
All right.
Let's see. I heard that you guys have different extensions. Is there something for Confluence?
There's actually two things for Confluence. So structure itself will allow you to bring the gadget or any kind of structure you can put it inside your Confluence pages. So as long as there's an application link on-prem, you can bring it in. On cloud, it should also work through the application link because it works through the same mechanism. On-prem, you also have an extension called structured pages, which will allow you to bring in your Confluence pages to your structure. So you can actually have the pages visible here. You can have them connected, and you can, edit them just like you would. So for example, I can go to like I would any issue, I can bring in the issue details on the right, make any edits and close it. The same applies to, if I can pull it up real quick, any demo with Confluence pages. So I cursor the demo here, don't have that one prepared, but I could bring in pages by using an insert filter, for example, and finding all the, let me see, typical story, and all the pages that are connected to it. So we've got some rules that allow me to bring in those pages. I don't think I'm ready to show you that one though. So I'll have to owe you that one.
Alrighty. Well, at least we know the answer. And yeah, I do remember there is the ability to actually display the Confluence pages in the hierarchy. It's pretty cool. So I would suggest that you can look that up later. Let's see. There's one more question in the QA. See. Okay. Okay. Last question. Can you export a structure to Excel?
Yes. So any of the hierarchies you end up developing, you can export to Excel. The Excel page will also honor the hierarchy that you've built, so you'll have all the indentation. Anything that's calculated, however, will be snapshotted. So any formulas don't get magically turned into Excel formulas. That would be really cool if we could do that, but not really. All the numerical values that are attached to things like progress and aggregations, you'll get a numerical field. So we'll take a snapshot of that information there.
Alrighty. I guess that's all, Phil. You answer everything.
All right. Well, thank you everyone for your time. Let me bring you back to the resources here.
Yep.
So you can always swing by our website or our marketplace listing to check out structure. Obviously, like all Atlassian apps, you can demo them and evaluate them for a little while. Feel free to reach out to my team at solutions@almworks.com if you have any questions, both about the tool or about licensing or anything we can help you with. And then obviously ServiceRocket's always available for any help when it comes to implementation type questions, or if you guys are already customers, anything on those lines. Right, Mario?
Yep, absolutely. Yep, don't hesitate to reach out. We'll be glad to help. And I believe we have one more slide, Phil, if you skip to the next one. This one, I just want to say thanks to everybody, and to say the next session will be with Tempo. So I hope to see you there. Yep. Thanks a lot, Phil. That was awesome.
You're very welcome, Mario. Thanks everybody for joining us.